6:15 on a Tuesday morning. A flatbed backed into the yard at Vance and Kerr Boat Works. The driver didn't cut the engine. He just handed over a work order and said the owner wanted it done before lunch. CEO Delphine Kerr had signed it herself. She called them 5 waterlogged liabilities cluttering a balance sheet. Behind the flatbed, on trailers, sat 5 wooden hulls, stripped, cracked at the ribs, hauled out of a storage barn that hadn't been opened in 6 years. Silas Vance walked to the third hull. He ran his palm along a seam below the waterline, a repair only one man alive would recognize by feel. His hand didn't shake from age. It shook because he'd cut that seam himself 12 years ago, the winter his wife was dying. In 7 weeks, Delphine Kerr would stand in front of her own board and take back every word she'd said in that yard. Stay till the end. The flatbed pulled out at 6:40. Silas stood among the hulls a long time, running his hand along each one, reading the builder's marks stamped into the transom under the paint. He knew every one. He'd laid every keel. By 7:30, he'd rolled the barn doors shut and gone back to the shop. The next morning, a white Audi came down the Causeway Road and parked crooked in the gravel. Delphine Kerr got out alone, a leather portfolio under one arm. She didn't knock. She walked straight to the workbench where Silas was scraping varnish and set down a single page. My legal team needs a supplemental release. Same terms as yesterday. Sign at the bottom. Silas set the scraper down. He read the page line by line. Delphine watched him with the patience of someone who had never once in her life waited on a boat builder to finish reading anything. Take your time, she said. I imagine the language is unfamiliar to you. He didn't answer. He turned the page, read the liability clause twice, and signed. She'd expected some resistance. She got none. She slid the page back into her portfolio, and on her way out her eyes drifted across the shop. The tool wall in perfect order, a half-finished hull on stocks, a faded photograph pinned above the bench. A wooden sloop cutting hard across open water, sail number 19, a much younger man at the tiller. Quaint little operation, she said. Very rustic. She let the screen door bang behind her. Silas listened to the Audi pull away, then said to no one, testing the words the way a man tests ice before he steps on it. Sure you don't want to keep hull number 3, Miss Kerr? It wasn't for her. It was for the part of him already deciding what came next. In the corner of the shop, a boy looked up from a comic book. Eli was 8. He had his mother's stubbornness and his father's quiet. Dad, your hand was shaking. I'm fine, bud. Silas crossed to the old sea chest under the workbench, lifted the lid, and pulled out a folder gone soft at the corners. Inside, hand-drawn hull lines, sail plans, notes in a cramped, careful hand signed S. Vance, chief designer. I've got a few busy weeks coming, he told Eli. I need to call an old friend tonight. Is he a good friend? The best one I've got left. Marcus Odom showed up the next morning in a truck with a cracked windshield. He walked into the shop, stopped 6 feet in, and didn't say anything for a solid minute. Then he crouched by hull 3, read the mark under the paint, and looked up with wet eyes. She was actually going to burn these. Silas handed him the release order. Marcus read it once and shook his head. 12 years of your life on this yard. You need to hear something you don't know. Warren Kerr picked you himself in 2011. The board wanted a name-brand naval architect from Newport. He overruled all of them. Told me once you were the only builder he ever met who understood that a hull has to want to move through water, not just displace it. Silas said nothing. And the reason you left in 2019, that wasn't only about Marisol. The board, mostly Grady Pruitt, sat on your severance for 4 months while she was in hospice. $600,000, tied to a non-compete you couldn't sign without handing over your own hull designs. You walked with nothing. Warren was in Nova Scotia when it happened. He came back to fire Pruitt and had his heart attack before the paperwork went through. Silas set both hands flat on the bench. Delphine doesn't know any of that, Marcus said. She doesn't know who you are. She doesn't know who Pruitt really is. She walked into her father's company grieving, with a spreadsheet in one hand, and Pruitt's been steering her ever since. I'm not going to tell her. You're going to restore 5 boats and let her think you're just a guy with a barn. She insulted a barn. I'm going to restore 5 boats because they deserve it. The rest is hers to work out. Marcus exhaled. What do you need? Ribbing stock for 11, a new rudder post for 15, and 8 weeks of your hands. You've got them. That evening, in a glass office on the 14th floor, Delphine closed her laptop and looked at the framed photo on her credenza. Her father in 2013, standing beside a man in a canvas apron and safety glasses, face half hidden under a ball cap. She'd passed that photo 1,000 times. She'd never once asked who he was. At the yard, Eli carried 2 mugs of cocoa out to the shop and handed one to Marcus. Your dad used to build boats that won races, Marcus told him. He never told your dad's boss the whole story. He's the only man left who knows how to bring these back. Eli considered this with real gravity. Then I'll bring him cocoa every night till he's done. Marcus laughed for the first time in months. By the second week, Delphine's assistant called to arrange one more signature. In person, neutral ground, a coffee shop downtown, 10 o'clock. Silas washed his hands twice. He didn't change his shirt. There was epoxy on the cuff that wouldn't come out, and he didn't pretend otherwise. The shop was full. Delphine had taken the center table with her corporate counsel on one side, 2 junior associates on the other, cappuccinos in front of all 4. Across from her sat one empty chair. Silas walked in at 10:05. He wiped his boots on the mat. Delphine let her eyes travel from his boots to the epoxy on his cuff and said, loud enough for the next table to hear, Mr. Vance, next time you might wash the shirt before meeting counsel. Or do they not distinguish out at your yard between a workshop and a conference room? A junior associate laughed. The table beside them went quiet. A man 2 seats over lifted his phone. Silas crossed the room, sat, and reached for the folio. May I read it? By all means. We're not paying you by the hour. More laughter. He read every clause twice. He turned to the signature page and signed in 3 places without comment. He slid it back. Sure you don't want to keep hull number 3, Ms. Kerr? Delphine's cup stopped halfway to her mouth. She'd heard that line once before, except she hadn't been there when he said it. She only had the words now and the look on his face saying them. Silas stood, nodded once to counsel, and walked out. Delphine didn't finish her coffee. She gathered her own folios, which she never did, and left ahead of her attorneys. She drove back with the radio off, telling herself the unease was about nothing. A man who'd read a contract carefully. A man who hadn't flinched when she meant to make him flinch. But the line about hull 3 sat in her chest like a stone in a shoe. She hadn't told anyone which hull was which. Pruitt had handled the manifest. Pruitt had picked the flatbed contractor. Pruitt had handled the manifest. Pruitt had picked the flatbed contractor. Pruitt had even chosen the loading order. How did the boat builder know there was a hull number 3? That week she read her father's will again, alone, pencil in hand, marking every clause she'd skimmed through in the fog of grief. One stopper cold. The Heritage hulls VK01 through VK20 shall not be destroyed, sold, or transferred in any form without the written consent of the original chief designer. She underlined original chief designer. She realized she had never once asked who that was. She drove out to the yard unannounced and found Marcus sorting bronze fittings into 2 trays, keep and replace. She knew him. 20 years at Kerr Marine. He'd stood at the back of her father's funeral and never come forward. Mr. Odom, what are you doing here? Helping a friend. She turned to Silas at the bench, sleeves rolled, hull 3 lifted onto a clean cradle, sanded and faired. It no longer looked abandoned. It looked like something waiting. Who are you, Mr. Vance? I'm a boat builder. Boat builders don't get Marcus Odom driving 40 minutes to sort bronze for free. Silas looked at her for a long count and didn't answer. She left without asking again. That night, she pulled the framed photo off the credenza. The man's hands rested on the bench beside her father's, a wedding band, a small scar across the knuckle. She'd seen that scar 3 days ago, gripping a pen in a coffee shop. By the 3rd week, Delphine came to the yard 3 times without a stated reason. She sat in the office and drank coffee off the burner. She brought a paperback. She stood 10 feet from the bench and watched his hands work a spoke of Chauvet along a stem piece. Eli came in from school, saw her, and stopped. You came back. I came back. Want to read with me? I have a book about boats. She meant to say no. She said yes. They sat with the book between them, Eli explaining lift and drag and wetted surface with total 9-year-old seriousness. Delphine laughed, the first time since her father died. At the bench, Silas slowed his hands and didn't look up. He sanded the same plank 3 times. The next morning, she drove to Marcus's house, who was the original chief designer on the VK program. Marcus looked at her a long second. You've met him. Where? You already know where. She drove back toward the yard and parked across the street instead of pulling in. She watched the shop lights through the window, Silas showing Eli how to hold a block plane, laughing at something the boy said. She didn't go in. Friday, Pruitt appeared in her office with a slim folder and a satisfied smile, 2 of his own attorneys behind him. I think we're ready to file. If Vance successfully restores these to racing spec, he's in clear violation of his 2019 non-compete. We sue, we recover all 5 hulls, we collect damages. He opened the folder. On top, a 2013 photo, her father's hand on Silas's shoulder. She looked at it for 10 seconds without breathing. Let him finish. She looked at it for 10 seconds without breathing. Let him finish. The minute the first one's in the water, we file. He loses everything. She closed the folder. She didn't move it. Thank you, Grady. Leave it with me. Once he was gone, she locked it in her bottom drawer. Pruitt had built this file. Pruitt knew exactly who Silas was. Pruitt had still signed the destruction order, which meant Pruitt had wanted Silas to receive those hulls. Monday of the 4th week, Delphine drove out with a small wooden box on the passenger seat. Brass hinges, found in her father's safe, unopened since the funeral because she'd been unable, then unwilling. The key had been taped under a desk drawer the whole time. She sat on the bench. My father kept this locked away. I want to open it with you. Inside, a letter never mailed, dated 4 months before her father's death. A USB drive, a sealed envelope marked Vance in her father's slanted hand. She read the letter aloud, steady at first, then quieter. Her father had commissioned a private audit and discovered Grady Pruitt had been running false disposal contracts since 2016. $3.9 million routed through 2 dealers, hulls and hardware reported destroyed, but actually sold to private collectors overseas through shell accounts in the Caymans. Her father wrote that he intended to fire Pruitt within the month and to reinstate Silas Vance as chief designer with full back pay plus interest. He died of a heart attack 3 weeks later, the week before her 32nd birthday. Delphine set the letter down. Her hands were steady. Her breath wasn't. The sealed envelope held a notarized document naming Silas Heritage Design Trustee, with an 8% equity stake in Kerr Marine, contingent on the VK program's formal reinstatement. The drive held Pruitt's full ledger, buyers, wire dates, cross-referenced against the company's own disposal records. I signed a paper giving you $4,000 to haul off boats worth millions. I was a fool. You weren't a fool. You were lied to. There's a difference. Why didn't you tell me at the start? Because you didn't know who I was yet. Telling you wouldn't have saved the boats any faster. I needed to save them whether you believed me or not. Eli came in with 2 mugs of cocoa, one with a marshmallow floating off-center. Dad says when people are sad, cocoa helps. I made you one. Delphine held it in both hands and didn't let go for a long time. By the 6th week, Hull 11 was in the water on a test run out past the breakwater. Silas checked every fitting twice, then a 3rd time. Eli watched from the dock with binoculars. Marcus stood at the bow line. Delphine stood beside Silas, sleeves pushed up, which he'd never seen her do. You take her out. Me? My father always had someone outside the design side take the first run. Said it was how you knew a boat would accept new hands. She stepped down into the cockpit. He nodded. She took the tiller. The hull came alive under her, cutting a clean line through the chop, faster and steadier than anything on paper had promised. She called a buyer that afternoon, a name Pruitt had spent years trying to get on the phone. I have 5 restored heritage hulls, better than original spec. Who certified them? The buyer asked. Silas Vance. A long pause. The Silas Vance. Yes. That Monday evening, Pruitt came to her office with a sealed envelope and a press statement already drafted. We're ready to file. Vance finished the first hull yesterday. We have him. Delphine slid a different folder across the desk. He opened it. Wire transfers. Shell accounts. His own signature. By the third page, his hands weren't steady anymore. She pressed the intercom. Security, please escort Mr. Pruitt out. The following Wednesday, Delphine walked into the boardroom with Silas beside her in a clean canvas apron he didn't pretend was a suit. She laid out 40 minutes of evidence without raising her voice once. The false contracts, the overseas wires, the withheld severance, Marcus's notarized statement, her father's letter, the trust document. The vote to reinstate the VK Heritage Program was unanimous before she finished reading the motion. Silas was named chief designer, reporting directly to the CEO. His back pay was authorized with 9 years of interest. Pruitt was indicted by the end of the week. Afterward, Silas and Delphine walked to the parking garage together, not touching, walking at the same pace. You're not moving to the city. No, Eli's school is here. The yard's here. I'll come in when you need me. Or I could come out more. You could. She got in her car and didn't drive away right away. Thank you for the boats. And for the rest of it, the things you didn't say, the things you let me figure out on my own. You don't have to thank me. I'm going to anyway. 6 months later, at a coastal regatta, Hull 19 carried sail number 19 again. The same number, the same paint, a new captain at the tiller. Eli stood between Silas and Delphine on the dock, a notebook of wind readings in his hand. The boat took its class by 4 boat lengths. Marcus wiped his eyes where no one could see. That night, on a porch above the water, Delphine stood at the rail. Silas came out and stood beside her, not close, not far. My father would be proud, she said. He was proud of you before I ever came back. She was quiet a long time. I signed a paper to burn 5 boats. I called you a rustic hobbyist in front of 3 lawyers. And in the end, those 5 boats brought me here. It wasn't the boats. What was it then? He didn't answer. He looked at her. She understood without the words. She put her hand on the rail beside his, not touching. Close. He thought about what her father used to say about trim. A boat only moves well when the load is set right. Not too far forward, not too far back. He thought maybe a life worked the same way. Maybe she'd come not too early and not too late. Exactly when he was ready to let someone else onto the dock, without capsizing what he'd spent years keeping afloat. She turned her face toward him in the dark and said nothing. The tide kept it slow, even rhythm below them. Some things didn't need to be said to be known.